At first, it seemed like it was going to be a James Bond-style murder. Welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. This story didn't happen in Poland, but I think the whole world is wondering why someone in Greece shot such a talented Polish scientist. It seemed like this was really a story with a criminal mystery, something you could compare to a movie script. A movie, a thriller. And it's hard not to talk about this case, so that's why I'm inviting you to today's episode. Professor Przemysław Jeziorski, because that was his name, the Polish man who was shot, was originally from Gdynia. He came to Warsaw to study and attended the Warsaw School of Economics here. Then he went to the United States, where he completed his master's studies at the University of Arizona. These were master's studies in mathematics and economics. Then he earned his PhD at Stanford. And then he became a lecturer in economics and in subjects that I would say are extremely important today, because one of those subjects is quantitative marketing. He taught at the University of California, Berkeley. I would say it's an exceptional field, what the professor did for today's times, because in his numerous lectures and publications, he showed how a given advertising campaign can be effective. Well, I think that a lot of companies, institutions, but also private individuals would pay really big money for their advertising campaign to match people's tastes. This is a kind of control over people's minds. It's no wonder that Professor was someone special. He was involved in a unique, I would say, a field of human life. But as it turned out, there were also special services involved in this matter. Not only the special services of the United States, but also of America, because the field of controlling people's choices and minds is an area that even politicians are struggling with today. Professor arrived in Greece on June 27th. We would say that he rented a room under short-term rental conditions. Of course, those rooms in Greece, there's attention to detail. I would say they're more exclusive. Attention to detail, and above all, that room is for people who have money. He didn't come here because he had some business purpose. At least nothing from this trip, from the purpose of this trip, indicated that he came here to discuss any matters, to lecture, or to do what he did every day at the university. Well, Professor had, I would say, quite big problems. These problems basically started in 2021 when he got divorced from a Greek woman. That divorce, I would say, was going well up to a certain point. Basically, it seemed that he and the Greek woman would somehow come to an agreement, but there were quite a lot of problems here. Because yes, they met back in 2013 in San Francisco. She was very young, only 22 at the time. He was a doctoral student. A great love in 2014, so a year later they got married. In 2015 they had children. They are twins. And that was the first problem, taking care of those children. And secondly, because of what the professor did, he made quite a fortune. And that fortune was also in a way connected to these various problems. Anyway, they just couldn't get along after the divorce. It was the same here, that when the court issued the verdict, it stated that Professor would be able to take the children, both of them, for a month, either to Poland or to the United States. And he actually did that twice. But after they came back, his ex-wife had objections about how the children were behaving. And basically about what they saw during those trips. Apparently, because she was the one saying it all the time, there were at least two situations that the children shouldn't have seen. First of all, that the professor's former partner tried to kill herself in front of him. That's the first thing. And another time, the professor was simply drunk, and he left the children on a bench somewhere in the park. So she decided that since that's the case, the professor couldn't take the children anymore, but of course he consistently wanted to have contact with the children. That's why he flew to Greece, so they could try to work things out. And for July 4th, such a hearing was scheduled. First in court, so they could once again try to verify the custody of the children. And secondly, there was also supposed to be a visit to a child psychologist. Well, as I understand it, so that the court could see whether these suspicions, these concerns from the wife are actually justified, and whether to actually issue, and whether the professor can still take the children on those month-long trips to the United States, also to Poland. And in fact, on that day, so July 4th, they meet in court. Then they go to a psychologist. This is already in another city, about 5 kilometers away. Well, it seems that everything is on the right track. What's more, the professor on that day, July 4th, can take the boys with him and spend time with them until the evening. He's heading home. He usually traveled in Greece by subway or taxi. He took a taxi and left. To his ex-wife, who lives in the suburbs of Athens, that's Agia Paraskavi on Irini Street. That's where his wife Nadia lives, because that's my name. Well, today she's 34 years old. He practically got out of the taxi and walked up to his ex-wife's house. And then, unexpectedly, an attacker appears. He's masked. He's dressed all in black. He has a pistol in his hand. And he shoots. He shoots the professor 5 times. The professor is hit in the neck, in the chest. There's no chance. He dies on the spot, and the attacker escapes. Well, the first reports that went around the world suggested that it was a man, a professional killer, a hitman, who lay in wait for the professor in that spot and shot him in cold blood. Well, that's how it all looked. Here, too, everyone started to wonder why the professor was shot. These very sensational threads start to appear. So because of the professor's profession, what he does, what he lives off every day, and of course the second version, I would say more trivial, more mundane, is that behind his death, behind hiring this killer, maybe stands his wife, who didn't like the fact that her husband actually gained some influence over the children, that he could take them that day, that he was even trying to make sure the children went to the American school in Greece. Also with the idea that when they grow up, he would take them to America. Here, of course, for many observers, the doubt was that the wife lost her footing, that she saw that in all of this, she wouldn't have the sons just for herself, that gradually the husband would have influence, and as a consequence, someday in a few years, they would simply leave for the United States or maybe Poland, although it's more likely the first, and they would live there permanently and she wouldn't have contact with them. Well, that seemed logical. I also think in that direction, although the thread about a killer who murdered on behalf of, for example, some organization or group because the professor didn't fulfill something, well, that was plausible. For the Greek police, it was just as likely, or maybe even more likely, that it was actually his wife behind his death. And indeed, the police are looking into Nadia, his ex-wife, and they secure her mobile phone, and here the first clue appears. Although she deleted the photo, the police information technology specialist managed to recover it. It's a photo taken from behind. But it's definitely a photo of the professor, the way he looked that day, or rather what he was wearing. Of course, the police also checked which phone the photo was sent to. And it turned out that this photo, meaning the professor's appearance from that day, was sent to the phone of a certain 14-year-old boy. That was the first clue in the case. Police also began looking more closely. She also posted various kinds of photos like that. For example, on social media, there was a photo like that generated by artificial intelligence showing two men lying in bed. One hugs money, the other hugs children. It says, when you chose the right man to be the father of your children. There was also a kind of emotional signal suggesting that she might be behind her husband's death. Also, the police, review the surveillance footage. It turns out that in the place where the killer, let's call him that, was shooting, there are several cameras. One camera filmed the professor being shot, and more than a dozen others also recorded the incident. How he was escaping, how he ran into the alleys, how he was running. And one of the cameras also noticed that while all this was happening, from a spot not far from where the murder took place, a very expensive Porsche drove away very quickly, even screeching its tires. The professor did escape in one direction, the Porsche drove off in another, but there was some clue that maybe the driver of the Porsche had some connection to the professor. It turned out here that it was the Porsche that hired two Albanians who had simply rented the car earlier. The police also quickly determined that the Greek woman, Nadia, had been in a relationship for some time with another Greek, a 35-year-old named Christos. So they also started checking the location of his phone, and it turned out that Nadia's partner was actually in a completely different town at that time, Napio, about 5 kilometers away from the place where the incident happened. The murder. So theoretically, since his phone was connecting in a town 5 kilometers away, he was probably there himself as well. But the police are also checking the phone number to which the professor's photo was sent. And here it turns out that the phone does belong to a 14-year-old boy, but that boy is none other than the son from the first marriage of Christos, Nadia's current partner. So slowly everything here started to come together into one whole. The Albanians were also detained, and quite quickly, because it was clear they were rather scared. They told very quickly what had happened and what they had gotten themselves into. After literally just a few days, another man was also detained, a 40-year-old Bulgarian, and that's because he was seen in the car belonging to Nadia's partner in that town of Napio, which is supposedly where he was alone. Of course, he was also detained, and after all this, practically 5 people were arrested. So Nadia, 2 Albanians, Bulgaria, and the partner. Well, everything seemed to fit together logically. A seemingly precise plan emerges from all the testimonies, though it was only meant to be precise. It looked like this. Indeed, Nadia, used to a certain kind of luxury, to money, and above all it seems possessive when it comes to the children, didn't want to give up control here or give the children over to the father's authority or allow the possibility that he might take them. Therefore, she saw no other way out than that her ex-husband had to be killed. She convinced her current partner to do it, and he agreed. About a month earlier, there were preparations. He bought a Tokarev pistol, which is very popular because that's a very popular name here. Tokarev pistol, which is a weapon that, for example, was standard equipment in Poland, used by militiamen and even police officers during that transitional period. A very popular weapon. Well, it's a military designed weapon. Therefore, by design, it's meant to easily kill because of its caliber. He bought the weapon, they set a date, and decided that the best time would be July 4th, when Professor Jeziorski would come for the trial and to meet his wife. He also hired someone for this. First, he turned to his friend, that Bulgarian guy. Apparently, they had known each other for a long time because he used to repair his car. The Bulgarian, in turn, put him in touch with two Albanians. They were simply supposed to transport him, give him the means to get away quickly from the crime scene. But it seemed that the Albanians probably didn't know exactly what was going to happen, because in their testimony they said that of course they agreed to take part in all of this, but they thought that the one who hired them would just scare the professor. There was no mention that he would kill him. So when they saw in that rented car, in that Porsche, when they were standing next to it, when they saw that the professor was dead, they simply got scared that they would be held responsible for murder and ran away, leaving him stranded, because that way he couldn't get into the car and had to keep running on foot. That same day, the Bulgarian also took Christos' cell phone, took the car, went to Napio, and there he pretended to be Christos. And everything seemed like it was going to be such a good, intricate plan. Actually, the attack was supposed to happen not in front of the ex-wife's house, but in the town where they met with the psychologist. But it looks like someone messed up. Apparently, the Albanians arrived too late because Chrysos didn't manage to get there before the professor left. And that's how the attack didn't happen in that place 5 kilometers away, because it probably would have been more difficult. However, he did know that the professor would come to pick up the children from his current partner, that is, to Irini Street, where he would just wait. The plan was even more elaborate because they concluded that the police would also check the text messages, so Nadia and Chrysos exchanged such messages between themselves. She wrote, after the professor's murder, she wrote a text message and sent it to her partner's cell phone, saying that something bad had happened. And he replied that he didn't know anything, that in that town he was drinking. So that was supposed to be some kind of extra story, an alibi for him that he really wasn't in that place. Well, after the arrest, this one as well, the Bulgarian, who seems to have known everything, he puts more blame on Nadia. He says she was the driving force behind all of this, that she was the one who convinced her partner to shoot her ex-husband, that she promised money. The Albanians got 1,000 euros each. They were actually promised much more money, about 50,000 euros, but as an advance, they only got 1,000 euros. Right now, it looks like this Christos is taking everything on himself, that he's blindly in love with Nadia. He testified that he did it to finally bring peace and happiness to Nadia and their children. So for the twins and his 14-year-old son, but Nadia herself doesn't admit to anything regarding this evidence. But the evidence that does exist, like the fact that she sent a picture of the professor from that day, that she later exchanged text messages, all of this is evidence against her, that she will also be held accountable for this crime. Well, it must be said that Professor Jeziorski, when he was leaving for Greece at that time to meet his children or to settle those contacts with them, he was simply afraid. He even told his partner about it. And he was afraid not without reason, because a year ago, well, a little over a year ago, on May 15, 2024, he was in Greece to meet his children. At that time, the man who killed him attacked him twice, beat him and kicked him. At one point, when he was attacking him, even a security guard from the German embassy helped him. Well, then the aggressor stopped, so it was clear from that he was constantly hunting him. He also talked about how his ex-wife is trying to ruin his reputation, that she would report him, for example, to the authorities or to the university, about how she also helped him write various kinds of academic papers, that she would ruin his reputation. That's likely where those stories I mentioned earlier come from. She kept trying to tarnish his name, to blackmail him in some way. And that's also why the professor filed such a notification to the court. This is a court in California asking the court to prevent his ex-wife from approaching him. There was even a specific provision. Distance in his request, it was 100 yards, which is about 91 meters. That was supposed to be the distance because he was afraid that his wife would simply attack him as well. The court did not agree to this, stating that it looked like it was not only a case of assault, but also of abuse. The California court said this was insufficient to prove abuse. Therefore, his request for a restraining order against his wife was rejected, and as we know, because this request was filed about 2 months ago, after that time the professor was already dead. It probably wouldn't have helped much anyway, because the same restraining order wouldn't have done much for him in this situation, when it was clear that they had basically sentenced him. But that's also kind of the atmosphere of this whole case. Well, this elaborate plan, so carefully prepared, I would say, in the final phase was almost tragicomic, because it turned out that the Albanians got scared of the whole thing, drove off and left the killer out in the cold. He had to escape on foot. He ran to his Bulgarian friend, but he also looked dramatic. He was barefoot, all wounded and torn. He said he got out by taking 2 buses and a taxi to get to him because he had no other way to get there. It seems that right now the investigation is indeed ongoing. It has basically started that behind the death of the talented Professor Polak, who was a lecturer in California at the University of Berkeley, that it's not, I would say, any kind of organized crime, not some killer who was waiting for him for some mysterious reasons. It really seemed a bit like some kind of version from James Bond, but it all ended with everything looking like it's just a Greek tragedy, probably the kind we learned about in school and of course on the sidelines of all this. Nadia fought so hard for her children that today her children will be left alone and her son will also be left alone. Her partner from her first marriage, well, in this kind of thinking, I think we lose ourselves. So that's also some kind of conclusion from this case. At first it seemed like it would be just a murder straight out of James Bond, a James Bond-like scenario. It looks like this is seen like a Greek tragedy. And that's it for this episode for today. Of course, subscribe to our channel and of course, take care.